Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush. An emotional couple days. Holy cow.
It was emotional, wasn't it? It was emotional to see Yelena Ostapenko lose in that final. I had high hopes going into the weekends, but yeah. Sad times for all involved.
I know you're being facetious, but also tour life happened. We will begin with the Laver Cup, and then we'll get to real tennis TM. But this was a really weird time, Simon, and I feel like it was an end for an era, but also not even that cathartic. I enjoyed it, but I also was like, wow, this is affecting me way more than I thought it would.
Well, I think we talked last week, didn't we, about how Roger Federer's retirement and Serena Williams' retirement and the Queen's dying all affected people slightly differently in terms of what those inflection points in our lives actually forced us to think about things. And I think I was like you as well. Like, I think this week and that match and the ceremony afterwards and the sheer quantity of tears by all that was shed on court, I think it moved me in a way that I wasn't really expecting, to be honest, to have some level of separation from a bunch of millionaires playing a game at the center of a court. And then you sort of drop all that for a second and realize there are human beings involved in relationships and friendships and all those sort of things that go with it. It was really weird. It was really weird. Everything that I thought it was going to be, it actually turned out to not be that, the opposite of it. And I think I share that with you, which is just, I wasn't really expecting to be as strangely emotional as I was watching the ceremony.
I guess we do after 2021 and Hubert catch and that end of the tournament. That seemed like it was going to be it, but we were waiting for one final crescendo, and it was just really well done. And I think that's kind of how Fed's career has gone. Bush, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like generally there was never a misstep. There's always been a plan. And even as we got to a point where and we'll talk about this, but I don't think Rafa Nadal would have been there unless it was his last match. Like, there was a lot of things set up to make this a perfect moment.
I think so as well. And just coming fresh off the back of Serena Williams' final match, whatever we want to say. And it's just for argument's sake, say that it was her final match at the US Open a couple of weeks ago. I had Kobe Bryant moments and thoughts going into this Laver Cup in that final match he played the Grizzlies, right? In his final game. Grizzlies? I think it was.
Right.
And I really thought it was going to be like that. I really thought it was going to be just a circus, and his opposition was just going to kind of let him win and kind of let him show off. And it really wasn't that way. And I don't think Federer looked like he wanted it that way either. I actually thought from a tennis perspective, he looked all right. He looked a bit rusty, but I thought he served pretty well. And I thought he hung around and showed enough things that it was fascinating to watch just simply from that perspective of what does this dude look like who we've not seen hit a tennis ball in a long time. And really, it's been a while since we've seen him play at a top peak level. So that was fascinating. And then everything else that came after it, it was astonishing to watch the level of emotion from all involved on court and what he meant. I think one of the biggest surprises to me, everyone talks about the Nadal tears and the reaction, and we can come on to that in a second, but seeing someone like Matteo Berrettini with tears, seeing someone like Casper Ruud with tears, seeing Steph with tears, like this was all, it was a lot.
I'm curious, Bush, like, how wrecked are you? Because I felt like I was more despondent than I thought I would be.
For him losing the match?
Everything afterwards. That as well. But everything afterwards.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would be wrecked too if I had to sit through that Ellie Goulding performance again. Come on, people.
2 songs. 2?
2 songs.
Why 2?
Outrageous.
Why 2? I don't understand.
She has 1 hit single, people. Come on. How did we get the second one in there? I was wrecked emotionally. And I think it wasn't necessarily, there's obviously the human reaction to watching other people crying and being emotional that sort of drives that yourself. It's the same as hearing other people laugh or see other people yawning, and you can't help but mirror that to some capacity. But I think to a certain extent as well, it was a point where I had come to terms with Roger Federer retiring for a long time on the basis that Hurkacz moment I really felt like was the end of his career in that regard. But I'm not sure I was like the match itself. I thought was fun, and then I think the moments of seeing him with his children and seeing him with his wife and then seeing him with his peers, I think that struck me more than anything else over the last couple of weeks or since the announcement, is that they were the moments that really, made me feel like that this dude is beloved on the tour, and he has inspired a lot of people to pick up tennis rackets. And I think that is something that should be celebrated.
100%. I think I don't have like a non-fan view of this. Like I think Roger Federer for me was one of the vanguards of like the reason I want to do this podcast or want to keep talking about tennis, or the way he plays is literally why I care about this game so much. And I was a bit worried about how it would be summed up in not a like a theatrical kind of sense, but like I was worried about how it would go down, kind of. Bush, I don't know if you agree, but I was apprehensive, and I think it was well done. And also the fact that he has not played for a long time and he still looked with that silky service motion. I'm like, wait a minute, could he play still? Could he play doubles? Could he do these things? But I wanted to go to first Rafa's comments post match.
At some point when Roger leaves, I am losing an important part of my life. An important part of my life it's living with him. So difficult to hold emotions in that moment.
I don't know, Bush, if you were surprised as I was, but I knew they were friends and etc. and they'd been on this journey together. But I was taken aback by, and obviously I think there's other things going on in Rafa's life, like he was mentioning in his press conference. But that shook me, because I feel like I watched these people change sport and change not just tennis but everything else, and to see them together was something else.
I do think we need to park a couple of things here before we get into a discussion of sort of that relationship. The number one thing, we tend to look at the fringes of the discussion within our sport. Like, these people are millionaires, and in Roger Federer's case, they are billionaires, and there's a lot of stuff that you can say about this. But for the purposes of just analyzing this particular moment, it showed a really deep friendship. And I think that was the thing that we sort of saw a little bit of the truth behind it, in the sense that we all kind of had prescribed somewhat and projected somewhat of what we thought that friendship looked like, because we don't know a huge amount about the pair of them. Like, we don't get to see behind the scenes other than the carefully orchestrated versions that they present to the world, or their teams present to the world, and then seeing how deep that friendship is and seeing how it manifested itself over those 7 or 8 hours that they spent during that day, and the reactions they had. And it is really quite lovely. I think that's the best way that I can describe it. It just seems like a very nice friendship.
I think that's it. I think that's genuinely it. It's a longer conversation about fandom and why we like people we don't, or we like people we do, and the reason we go so steadfastly in for these kind of things. But holy cow, I think that this is one of these moments where it made me really happy to be a tennis fan and see all of them there, and especially Novak as well, which I'm curious about what your take on that was, Bush. But I thought it was good, and I think I'll lead into Roger's comments here.
It's been a wonderful day. I told the guys I'm happy. I'm not sad. So it feels great to be here. And I enjoyed tying my shoes one more time, and everything was the last time. And funny enough, with all the matches and having the guys and being here, fans, family, friends, didn't feel the stress so much, even though I did think something was going to go, pop a calf or block a back or something in the match. So I am so happy I made it through, and the match was great. I couldn't be happier. So it's been wonderful. And of course, playing with Rafa on the same team and having the guys, everybody here, all the legends, Rocket, Edberg, Stefan, thank you.
I think there's a wider discussion, Dev, to be had about, and I think this is something we can say for parting shots in general, because I think there's some other things that we'd like to get into for the Laver Cup in general, but the role of positive male role models and role figures in general. And I think that is something that needs to be more closely examined. The same thing with normalizing positive relationships between a husband and a wife or a partner. I think that was on display during the course of this week as well. And I think also just an acceptance and a level of vulnerability that you saw from especially Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, and the way that he interacts with his children as well. There's a lot to be said for this being a very positive week in general for male figures, because there's not many examples of it being displayed on a weekly basis of quality of quality figures demonstrated in this way. So I'd like to touch on that. Perhaps we can leave a parting shot simply because other stuff happened at the Laver Cup, not least someone setting themselves on fire, rightfully so. And the message, I think, didn't quite stick the way that it should do inside of that arena.
Let's talk about that now, then. I feel like should have been a bigger lead, but also end UK private jets as an insignia does kind of make sense, Simon.
Absolutely, completely. Like the person was completely justified. It's a shame, and that the state of the world is that we have to have someone doing that on centre court at O2 Arena in order for this to draw headlines in the way that, yes, the planet is on fire. We've seen the results of just in the southern parts of Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada during the course of this week of what deadly storms are going to do, and these get worse and worse due to the effects of climate change. Yes, end private jets, end all private jets, not just the United Kingdom, but end all of them worldwide. So appreciate and support what the protester did. I'm sad that it's come to this stage, but also agree with the message.
Fully back that. Everything else, I think this Laver Cup is something that they can build on and hopefully mix the genders and have women play in this as well. But this took on some new meaning this year, and I think obviously with Fed leaving. By the end, though, I kind of thought it was Novak's show, and it was very interesting to watch him be kind of at the peak of his powers on Saturday and then not really meaning anything at the end. Do we draw anything from this? Do we say that the North Americans have taken this balance of power?
No, of course not. Don't be silly.
Of course not.
Ridiculous. I mean, it's an exhibition to start with, right? Like, these are not competitive matches. That's the one thing. Even though if whatever any record books or whatever Tony Godsick and Roger Federer want to try and pull the wool over your eyes, this is still a glorified exhibition. And I don't know there was a whole lot of fully trying here. Although you see the scenes afterwards, it clearly does mean something to the players involved to get across the line and for Team World to finally win. Not least the John McEnroe, who was losing his mind over finally winning this such prestigious tournament. He finally won 5 in a row that took them to get across the line. But fair play, right? And fair play to one Felix Auger-Aliassime as well, to play the way that he did, despite Novak Djokovic looking weird, just flat out weird, looking like the greatest player in the world and of all time in his demolition of Francis Tiafoe, and then coming back the next day and looking fine. Just completely and utterly fine. The kind of performance that looked like he's not been playing for a while, and the kind of performance which makes you go, can this dude win 7 matches in a row without playing other tournaments? Like, I'm not sure. That being said, he did do it at Wimbledon. So joke's on me.
I watched him and I'm like, this guy is going to win possibly 3 of the 4 majors next year. It felt like that. What did you think of the ceremony and the idea of the GOATs being together? I loved it, and I I'm a mark for these things, but I think it's interesting where it's tennis and it's super fandom, it's super tribalism, you're cheering for one individual person. There's very few times, especially in current days, where you can back the people who made the sport what it is. And I loved it, Bush. I don't know about you, but I think as much as I dislike some of the things around the Laver Cup, I thought this mechanism was fantastic.
Is tennis the ultimate neoliberal sport in a lot of ways?
But it's never like this, though, right? Mm-hmm. It's in the other ideas that it's country based, which is also kind of sus as well. So
it's not just kind of sus; it is completely sus.
It is completely sus. It's completely sus. So
we come with arbitrary reasons for people to be associated together, based on your spawn point, if you will. Yes, I don't know. Like it was. I thought it was a lovely ceremony. And I thought it was a perfect bookend for Roger Federer's career. I really did, to come full circle on that discussion, because it was nice to have all of the big four there. I thought the way that it was handled, I thought Jim Courier was excellent on court as well and asked the right questions. And I think what possible conclusion did people want to see from Roger Federer other than winning a major and hanging it up, which was never going to happen? I think him losing at a tournament that he set up in a fun match that gave everything that people wanted to see, and then him crying his eyes out whilst holding Rafael Nadal's hand seemed like a pretty good conclusion for the whole thing.
Right. And I that's kind of the hero he was. He was flawed. He wasn't the best. I think we're okay with that. It took me a while to be okay with that, but it was the journey. And I remember I texted you during this and being like, I think my childhood ended, or like, this is it. And that's how it kind of felt. And I love the fact that everyone was there for that. And I also love the fact that the big three and the big four were there for that as well, because they deserve the plaudits.
Agreed. A fitting end to the career of Roger Federer, I think, in total. And I'm glad, actually, that I watched it live. I feel like it's one of those things that will stay with me for a while, that ceremony and that match. So I'm glad that I got to experience it. And I'm glad that I got to share that with the Discord server and people as well, because I think that's one that is fairly memorable to a lot of people.
We'll leave it there. We'll come back after the break to talk about the real tennis TM at the Laver Cup, plus everything else that happened, because the two Everest Leafs coming up next on Open Air. Hello and welcome back to the Open Air podcast. We promised you this. We're going to do some real tennis talk. The Laver Cup actually kept going after the Federer match. Team World has won, Bush. Does this serve as vindication for everything we've tried to battle for as just world in people, I guess? Like, we are these people.
I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, so let's go with maybe. It was a victory, I think, that was off the back of some really gritty performances across the board. I think that's the way that I would describe it. A lot of players who stuck at it, and I think that made for a really interesting tournament in general, because undoubtedly the European team won 5 in a row and also had the better players. I don't think there's any denying that, just on ranking and talent alone. Like, they had the stronger team in general, but the players for Team World stuck around and did enough and made it difficult and were very, very determined to make this a contest and not make this the farewell swan song for Roger Federer. I think that is testament to the fact that they won that doubles match. That match, the Federer match, actually turned out to be a really important point. It was huge for them.
Should we talk about I think we should, about the hate that Francis has received from just playing normally. And I think that's just obviously abhorrent and stupid. And I'm glad that Roger acknowledged it on the court as soon as he could. That being said, the vitriol on social media towards these cats, like, not surprising, but also holy cow.
Well, I don't know about you, but my first thought when seeing someone just play a completely normal doubles match is to rush straight to my Twitter account and tweet a lot of racist shit towards someone. That's clearly what is
That's
a normal,
right? Yes,
unhinged thing to do in a lot of ways. I feel really bad for France. This is not the first time and will not be the last time, unfortunately, this kind of thing happens. He is a really nice kid as well. And I think that's what makes this even more difficult, is that he does wear his heart on his sleeve. He is a good, fun personality. He's very liked on the tour. And his game is really fun to watch as well, as evidenced by the fact that he kept the world team in this and secured some really, really important points. This kind of shit has got to stop. And I know it's rich for me to say sitting at my laptop here on a tennis podcast, but in general, it's the culmination in so many, like, sport is a manifestation of what goes on in wider society. And I think that's evidenced here by, yet again, a poor black kid getting racially abused over just doing normal things. Yeah.
And the first thought I had when it happened was that. And I think that's an indictment on the way we live and the way we talk about things and how bad it is and how just absolutely stupid and horrendous it is. But I'm glad they moved on, and I think Fed acknowledging that this is sport and this is why we play, etc. Let's keep going, etc. And we went to Saturday, and it wasn't Francis, it was Felix Auger-Aliassime beating a seemingly unbeatable Novak Djokovic, who we saw on Friday night look incredibly great against Tiafoe. Can we read anything into this, Bush? I think we saw Felix beat Alcaraz in Davis Cup, and was Carlos obviously going through the ringer in the US Open, but these tantalizing glimpses of what he could be and what he could be in the biggest moments and relishing it. Ooh.
Well, I guess the harsh question here, I will say this tongue-in-cheek because I don't believe this, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because it makes for more fun podcasting. Is Felix Auger-Aliassime the master of winning matches that mean nothing?
the non-consequential. I mean, this might be one of them. And if you were going to be a skeptic, you would say, does Novak need to win this match at all? Does it matter that much to him?
I'm sorry, like, Novak Djokovic did not give a shit through the entirety of this weekend from the looks of it on the tennis side of things. Feels like he stuck around long enough to show everyone in that singles match that, nah, like, I'm still good.
I'm still here.
Good enough. Yeah.
I'm still here, yeah.
This dude who made the semi-final that everyone was talking about, yeah, I'm just going to allow him to win 4 games.
Blitz him. I think that's fair, but I will say, of the weirdness of this year, it was kind of shocking to see him dispatch someone who has been quite good for many weeks that easily. Bush, he's still Novak Djokovic.
He is, and I think it's a fair warning to the tour next year that despite the ascendancy of Carlos Alcaraz and him being the world number 1 and the year that Casper Ruud had and all the things that have gone with it, I think it sends a very sharp warning reminder to everyone that if Novak Djokovic is allowed to play at all these tournaments, and it sure looks like he will be able to play and suit up for all 4 next year, there's no reason to believe that he can't win all 4. Like, that's the stakes that we're at the moment. Right. It's very possible.
Shall we get to some real tennis, TM?
Yeah, I mean, you don't classify the Laver Cup as real tennis? I mean, I don't. So that's fine if you want to go down that route.
I mean, I'm not proud of it, but let's go to Asia, the Pan Pacific Open / the Korea Open in Japan and Korea, respectively. Naomi Osaka withdrawing during the tournament in a place she's won several times in Tokyo, Bush, but Ludmila Sasanova winning again, but Zhang Qiwen also being a massive part of this. And then we had Yelena Ostapenko in the Korean Open final. I want to say this, though. There's obviously too many tournaments, but obviously they have to exist for people to make money and subsists. But isn't it interesting that we have the end calendar of the tour being now who wants to show up to the farthest flung places in the world, and we don't set it up that well. It's a 500 event in Japan, but still, it's the enticements are not that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. You could certainly make the case that that is a particularly North American-centric view of the tour, or a very Western view of the tour.
It was as well.
That Tokyo and Korea have or China in a lot of cases as well. Like if we want to talk about that being the back end of the season, which is historically I think that the markets which have provided the WTA with a significant amount of money and a significant amount of revenue over the past few seasons, that these tournaments do hold prestige to a lot of players. And I think it's interesting that we go to the field next week in Guadalajara, where you have 17 of the top 20 of the WTA players entered into that tournament. And I think the other 3 are only not there due to injury. So that's kind of fascinating in its own right as well, that you have these back end of the season tournaments being well attended and actually do have merit and prestige. And I think that stands into contrast to the ATP. And I wonder whether or not finances play a big role in this, because there are a lot of tournaments that take place in the ATP. There's been a very limited number on the WTA side of things through the course of 2022. And I think that's been very, very apparent as you go through the WTA website. And the numbers are down. The numbers are significantly down over years previous of amount of tournaments played. So yeah, it was a good time, I think, for a lot of WTA players to really compete for rich prize money, as opposed to just the prizes of the 4 Grand Slams. And I think that's sort of changed this year in some capacity.
An extremely measured take after I tried to goad you into bombasticness. But Bush, that's par for the course. I'm proud of you. Let's move on to the Bezel Open. I thought it was serendipitous that Stan Wawrinka made a run here, but I also feel like it's kind of too much on the nose that he had to withdraw from injury before he got to that semifinal, really.
It was, yeah.
What do you think about these guys keeping this flame alive, trying to keep going? I think we've seen Andy doing it, and I've seen Andy talk about what does that mean going forward, but it's laudable, but also,
Well, Stan Wawrinka is 37. Roger Federer retired at 41, just coming off the back. Wawrinka's got 4 more years in him. 4 more years.
Easily, right?
Put the 2 fingers up. Absolutely. So Stan Wawrinka is, on merit alone and not protected rankings or anything, is ranked 306 in the world at the moment. He still is a name that I think draws people. I think he still probably gets tournament fees and appearance fees for going around the world and playing this sport. And lest we forget as well that he missed a significant amount of time in his 30s through injury. Like, I think he wasn't afforded the swan song of good health that a lot of players in their 30s, modern day players in their 30s, have been able to have. So I'm not saying that he's not without mileage on his bodies, because clearly he is, and he's clearly not the player that he once was. But I'm not sure there's any harm in him just continuing to keep going. Like, if he plays like someone closer to the world number 60 or 70 and periodically ends up in a semi-final and still entertains fans and collects a purse along the way, I think I would take that, Dev. I think that sounds like a pretty damn good life to me.
Not bad at all. We're recording this before the final happens between Marcus Giron and Brandon Nakashima, but I feel like that kind of thing where you are going back to your hometown, if you're Brandon Nakashima, and being that good of a tennis player and having this moment at a 250, it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, and Brandon Nakashima is someone that I remember talking to Vanch and to Owen when we did our predictions of where these players would end up from the next gen finals last year, which I thought was a really fun thought experiment to project some of these players forward to see where the highest ranking they would get to. He's still someone that's quite fascinating, Nakashima, because you still feel like he has a little bit more left to give. He's only 21 years of age.
There's a red line that I think could be big enough to win some big titles.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think he's that good. I think I said on the podcast that I think he tops out as about a 20 to 25 ranked player, and there's no shame in that either. 20 to 30, maybe a seeded player.
Big titles to me means 500s or 250s as well.
I do think he has a couple of 250 titles in his career. I think that's something that I could easily see. He already has 2 in his career. No, he doesn't. Sorry, he's lost 2 in the final. Checking my own memory on this, I thought he had won them, but then I remember that he lost to John Isner in Atlanta. Ah, yes, it's all coming back to me now. COVID has not warped my brain the way that it once was. What I will say about him, he's been inside of the world's top 50. I think the year that he's had has not been great, but I still think he has more to give. And I still am a believer in him, and he seems like a really good kid as well. So I'm excited to see what he does in 2023, because I think if he gets to world number 20, that is an exceptional 2023, and I think I'd be really, really happy for him.
Before we go on to our next thing, who do you think has a better career, Seb Korda or Brandon Nakashima?
I mean, easily Seb Korda, absolutely.
Really? What?
There's not a particularly challenging one. I don't think Seb
Really?
Korda has more in his game. I think he has a bigger game. He has a more powerful game. His serve alone will keep him in more matches and give him a chance. I think his game is overall more powerful and he has more weapons. So it's not a particularly difficult one.
What? Wow. Holy shit. Oh my God. Okay. Moving on, because that is Simon Bushel, obviously, bringing the heat to Tokyo. Ludmila Samsonova deserves her flowers. Like, what an incredible, almost on an Annette Kontaveit run here in terms of what she's been doing at the tail end of the season. That being said, I wanted to talk about Naomi Osaka Bush.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, like, will you see her in 2023? Because I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure we'll see her to start the season.
That, I think, is a really difficult question to answer, because we don't really know the state of what she's dealing with at the moment. The statement was somewhat ambiguous. She's talking about the illness of her pulling out of the Pan Pacific Open this week. I don't know. I really don't know. I think that's okay. Like, I don't really want to prognosticate any more into the life of what Naomi Osaka is going to do next season, because, quite frankly, I'm not sure any of us do.
Can I ask you to dig in a bit more and ask you what's going through Emma Raducanu's head after withdrawing from Korea?
I think positive things. It's obviously going to suck that she pulled out the way that she did, not least because I think she looked really good in that opening set against Ostapenko as well. And the wins that she had during the week leading up to that is that she looked back to her best form. She looked like she was looking like a player that had won a Grand Slam and started to find some form again. And I thought she would have won that match against Ostapenko had everything been all right with the body. I think positive vibes, things looking up, arrows pointing up for Emma Raducanu. It sucks, and it was a shitty way for that week to end, but in general, there was enough positives there that you look at it and think, okay, we're starting to see a plan here.
If we were to watch this as a normal observer and see someone who hadn't won a US Open before and be like, wait, let's see what she can do against Ostapenko before an injury, I think that would be a great sign. The fact that she took the first set and she was making inroads, you're 100% right, Bush. I hope there's some sort of actual discourse and not flailing at the worst takes. But I'm going to lean that there's going to be some things in the latter.
Yeah, and I think Raducanu herself sort of alluded to that in some of her quotes during the course of the week, where she described it as just building her game back up and progressing and setting smaller goals in that regard. And I think that's really what she's going to look to in 2023. It's a horrible situation, I think, for a 19-year-old to find themselves in, especially in Britain with the state of the press. And we've talked about this previously, that they are horrible, vapid...
Ghouls,
yeah. I mean, look for any sort of terminology you want to describe the British press. It sucks that she has to go through that. It really does. And I really am rooting for her.
It's well said. When we come back to finish up this episode of Open Air, it's Party Shots.
Welcome back to the show. It's time for parting shots to round out Laver Cup week, to round out the career of Roger Federer, just touching back on some of the things that we mentioned in the first segment. And Devang, I wanted to quickly talk about this idea of positive male role models and what it actually means to be a quote-unquote man. Because this came into sharp focus seeing the tears from Roger Federer, seeing some of the hand-holding, seeing some of the things that were said about both Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. I mentioned it, like parking all of the, billionaire shit as well. Like, we can't lose sight of the fact that these dudes are millionaires, right? And all that stuff that's problematic that comes with this side of it, and the endorsements they have, and all of those sort of things. But just leaving those things aside for a second, I saw a tweet which said that these two dudes, Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, were the embodiment of what jocks would look like if they actually went to therapy. Do you agree with that statement?
I do. 100%. The people who were chiming in to say, what a moment or what a photo, etc. A lot of those same people were championing the worst aspects of sport and the most toxic aspects of sport. So I kind of brush it aside and being like, well, where were you when we had a lot of issues regarding this? I don't think I can overstate how much that photo meant to me, or that image meant to me. I think tennis is in a weird spot where we are cheering for individuals and we don't have an idea of what it means to be a team supporter or cheering for the greater good. And I think some of us do cheer for other teams and things like that. But when you're cheering for an individual person, boy, it doesn't give you a lot of rope, Bush, you know what I mean? And I think these situations where you can come together and literally just support the game are too far fleeting.
Totally. And the quote-unquote masculinity as well, that so often has been around the very toxic elements of toxic masculinity, or whatever you want to describe as toxic in modern day society. I thought it was funny that you had what I thought was really genuinely the best parts of quote unquote. Okay, let me rephrase this. I'm aware that gender is a social construct and all this sort of stuff. I'm framing that to start with. I understand that.
Please wait, Simon. Please reaffirm that as well.
I understand that, but I will say, like, the society that we live in, we do place certain norms on particular genders and particular gender ideas as well. And I thought it was funny that the week that you have fucking Jordan Peterson, of all people, doing stand-up or whatever the fuck he does in the O2 in London, you do have what I think is two dudes on display in Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer who embody what it should be to be a quality dude. People who are nice to the people around them, people who are vulnerable, people who admit they have emotions and weaknesses. All of these things that are really positive, but still manage to excel in the areas they are and are deeply competitive in the sport that they choose to pursue. And I think that's really wonderful. And we just don't have that many good, positive male role models for our kids being brought up. And I think it fucking sucks across the board because all of them are either toxic or shitty or just bad people, especially within the confines of our sport here in tennis, because we're fresh off the back of allegation after allegation of sexual abuse, of domestic violence, of drug testing, of all this sort of shit. And then at least you have two dudes who seem like fairly nice people. There's a bar that's so low here, Dev, that I think we've finally managed to overcome it.
The vanguards. Literally people that we could still look up to and be comfortable with that. That image of the three of them, Novak, Rafa, and Roger. I can't get that out of my mind. I feel lucky. The
image that really breaks me is the one with Nadal behind Federer in tears. Not the one with them holding hands, but the one of seeing like basically your best friend falling apart in front of you. And just the genuine emotion reaction of feeling someone else's sadness, joy, whatever you want to call it. And I think we've all been there to a certain extent. And I think that's the mark of a really good, caring individual, that they are able to empathetically feel what another person's going through.
And I think you're going to get to this, but Rafa, I don't think was going to be there unless this was for this.
Not a chance he was being at the Laver Cup if it wasn't for Fed retiring. And I think his comments in press afterwards seemed to indicate that as well. I mean, he got up there pretty damn sharpish after all of this, just given his own not issues, but like just everything that's going on around him at the moment.
He's having a kid. He's having a kid. That's a big deal, right?
He is. His quotes are really lovely. They really were. Quote, "I'm a pretty sensitive person. I'm not worried about either crying. Crying is good sometimes. You need to let go of these emotions. As part of my life is leaving. So it is difficult." How damn nice would it be to hear more men and people in positions of power to actually use those words? Because it would normalize behavior, which I think is entirely beneficial to society in general.
It's well said, Bush. I texted you offline about this, but I felt like a bit of my childhood ended on Friday night. And I am very thankful that Federer was there for at least 20 years. At least 20 years of just being a damn marvel. And I can't understate how much he meant to me. And it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Well, I think it goes back to that question of male role models as well, as who the people that you gravitate towards and have figures around you that are actually like people that you want to emulate, and how many of those positive male figures are out there. It's funny, right? In contrast, you have some pretty shitty people in the sporting world. I mean, I touched on Kobe Bryant earlier, right? Massive piece of shit, like a colossal piece of shit, and still is revered by so many people, even after his passing, right? And this is not a good figure that we want to encourage, like our kids and future generations to emulate, because I don't think there's enough there in terms of the way that he presents himself to want to show the power of quality, quote unquote masculinity, to go into that very dicey term again. So yeah, I'm glad that he existed. I think I tried to take the best from what Roger Federer presented to the world, despite it being fairly corporate towards the back end of it. I think at least,
yeah.
I think at least there was that elegance and that grace and that trying to love the sport and respect people and have a good time and be lighthearted when you're outside of that.
It's well said, sir. Shall we move on to non-big four things?
We can. Can I, just not willing to go quite yet, just one last final thing. And I saw a tweet that sort of encapsulated this feeling and this emotion, which is like, it's one thing that at least Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal do as well. And no, I'm not going to go that. I was going to say and Novak Djokovic do as well, but that's not true. Let's not give them the benefit of the doubt. But it normalizes liking your spouse or your partner or whatever it is, right? Like it's just a.
Oh, it's not cringing, but I mean, there's a lot of cringe by the end. And the Ellie Goulding, I don't think she should have done 2 songs. I understand why she did, but I was a bit worried about how like Mirko would be referred to, or like what the acknowledgement would be. And I don't think Fed's ever kind of misstepped in that regard, but you know what I mean? It felt super patriarchal in that sense.
Right, yes. Like in the staying home and enjoying the kids and all
right,
that sort of
or like,
stuff,
and if she didn't let me do this, I couldn't have been there. And I understand the impetus, but also it's like, what the fuck? Like, what? What?
No, it's true. There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? Like I don't think it is as clear cut. There's clearly gender norms there, and there's obviously a lot of stuff to work through in that regard. And it's not as saying not to excuse everything, but she had her own career and she gave it up to try and support one of the greatest players of all time. It's a journey that I think a lot of women have had to do over the last fucking 5,000 years, whatever, or whatever modern capitalism is
Beyond.
1,000 years, or what,
Beyond.
exactly.
Beyond.
Yeah. In general, it's that's the point that I wanted to circle back on, which is just the idea of, it's okay to actually like your partner. It's okay to actually not talk shit about them or make fun of them or, have lighthearted jokes that you see so often. It's okay to just like people. That's okay.
Well said.
Let's dive into some of the tennis stuff. Maybe just as a segue into this, Dev, before we touch on some of the stories. How many players in the top 30 in the men's doubles are aged under 30 years of age? Top 30 ranking.
Ooh,
how many of them are aged under 30? So that's like 18 or 16 to 29.
I knew that you would get me on this. I had a feeling, and I've been looking. I'm gonna say one. There's one person. It's Kokkinakis.
You're pretty close. There's actually 4 players who are ranked in there, and they're all in the latter half of their 20s. So I just thought it was a really stunning fact, and it's kind of crept up on me just how old the doubles tour is at the top end of it. Like, you legitimately have players who are ranked who are aged 40 and above, who are still going at the top of the game. I think the average age is like 33 or something inside of the top 30.
I didn't realize Lloyd Glasspool is that young.
No, and what a time to be a British doubles fan. I keep coming back to it. You got the world number 1 and number 3. It's pretty damn fucking cool, isn't it?
Not bad at all.
Not bad. Yes. So it goes to show you, especially in the men's doubles era, play for a long time. 41, Roger Federer, passed it. No, wait. Still, no, what am I trying to say? You know what I mean. Let's move on.
Do you think Roger or Rafa could play doubles competently?
Probably not Rafa.
Because I saw Jack Sock play just immaculate doubles, and I feel like obviously it's a skill, but it's not like something you just have.
I think, do I back myself to make this point on a podcast? Let's go with it, Dev. Let's go with it.
Please.
I don't know it's that controversial, right? To say that I think Roger Federer would be the greatest doubles player of all time if he actually committed to it. Is that fair? Like, that seems reasonable.
I mean, I'm willing to go with it, but also I shied and shrugged.
Potentially one of the greatest singles players of all time, who is an incredible volleyer and one of the best servers of all time and has a really good feel for the game. It feels like a pretty easy transition to say that he'd be a good doubles player.
On one knee as well.
On one knee, yeah, exactly. And serving at 75% speed as well. Going from one washed up old person to
Right. Yeah.
transferring to the world number 1 on the men's side, Carlos Alcaraz. There's a nice write-up on the ATP website by Andrew Eichenholz. Carlos Alcaraz doing the scene this week, meeting with people and demonstrating a fashion taste for white trousers and white t-shirt, looking very like a member of the Backstreet Boys. Really did appreciate that. Did you see the photo, Devang?
I did. I love the guy he was posting with as well. That was fantastic. I also love the fact that Carlos seemed to be watching the Laver Cup stuff with all of us and living and dying on every
Living
point.
and dying. The guy was just all over the place, wasn't he? He was loving it emotionally.
A bit weird he wasn't there, but also they didn't expect him to be there, kind of thing.
It is kind of strange, isn't it? To know that this kid is the world number 1, head and shoulders above it, and they didn't expect him to be this good, hence a lack of invitation to the Laver Cup. It's kind of strange to not have the world number 1 there, but yeah, it's a bit odd. Anyway, the reason I wanted to bring it up is I thought the write-up was really good. I thought we've obviously done a couple of features on Carlos himself, but it's a nice précis for his career so far. I think there's some really interesting quotes in it as well, so encourage everyone to check out that piece of writing. It's always nice to support the written piece, especially within our sport when we get the chance to.
Really well laid out as well. Like it's nice. I think what they're doing at the ATP site looks cool.
Still pales into significance to the WTA website, though. It's the GOAT.
It does.
It's a significant.
Speaking of final segue.
Final segue to Victoria Jimenez, Katzensever from Andorra, who is 17, and she became the first Andorran to reach a WTA quarterfinal in Seoul. She was also the first junior number one from Andorra, fairly unsurprising statistic. She's really talented as well, and this was a cool write-up that the WTA did on her as well, which was Alex McPherson writing on the WTA site. Another one of those. Encourage you to learn about her and her path and her story, because she's going to be someone that we'll be talking about for a long time as well.
I feel like this is one of your staples, Bush, being on the ground floor of the Next Stars. So I'm going to feel proud to know that you called us out early.
I just think it's always really fun when you see young kids coming up, because you get to see where various different sports are at, what is being taught, what separates them for being really good, and where the trends are in all different sports, not just tennis. So anytime you see someone coming up and doing amazing things, there's lots to analyze about their game, their personality, and how they've managed to make it where they are, especially if they come from backgrounds which are not traditional tennis hotbeds. So really encourage you to check that out. And I think she's going to be a name we'll hear about quite a lot over the next 5 years.
Love it. 2 challenges remaining. Bush, you didn't put this down in the document, so now I'm very concerned about what you're going to say.
You shouldn't be, because, you know, I always bring the heat on 2 challenges remaining at some weird fucking obscure European film or something that I've been watching. Nah, I don't think so. I was just going to make the point that the Vancouver International Film Festival is back at through the course of this week. It starts on Thursday here in Vancouver. I have volunteered for 10 years. 10 years in a row. Met my partner there in 2015. So who says that volunteering isn't just all about watching films? Also met my partner for 8 years. So pretty damn cool. Seems like some good films this year as well. And it's always a good time, Dev.
I love that. I love that origin story as well, because that's fantastic. I am at a loss. I don't have anything to say good about, because the Buffalo Bills just lost. It's a heartbreaking game, and I'm not feeling well about all of that. So,
have you seen the reaction of the offensive coordinator? Have you seen this video that's circulating?
I have seen it. God.
It's a little bit funny, right? It's a little bit funny as a reaction.
Is it though? Okay.
Maybe not.
Noted.
Wrap us up.
Noted. I hate you so much. Okay. Hey, join us on patreon.com/openairpod. We're there creating these shows on a weekly basis. But if you join us, you get the show ad free, you get it early. Plus, you get access to the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time. I think that's a good sell. Bush, tell me if I'm wrong.
Pretty damn good sell to me. You got me convinced. I'm running there and joining immediately.
Yes. We're also on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, so you can give us a rating or a review. That'd be fantastic. Get this pod into more people's ears. For producer Greg on the What's Into Use, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to the Open Air Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.